Welcome to Nightshift Pulse. Comment your city and the time below. The night connects us all. If you enjoy what you hear, please subscribe. Let's step into the dark. Story 1. The Patient Transport Orderly's Phantom Transfer. The printer stuttered at exactly 2:47 a.m., and I knew before I even looked that it would be another transfer request. The sound echoed differently at that hour. Sharper, somehow more insistent against the antiseptic silence of the empty corridor. I'd been working patient transport at St. Agnes Memorial for 3 years, long enough to recognize the rhythm of night shift machinery. The predictable cascade of beeps and whirs that marked the passage of hours between midnight and dawn. This sound was the same, mechanically identical to every other print job, yet something about its timing made me pause mid-step. Coffee halfway to my lips. The paper was still warm when I pulled it from the tray. Standard transport request form. All the fields populated correctly. Room 417. Patient name Calloway. Marcus. Transfer destination CT imaging. Reason for transport listed as emergency scan. Requested by Dr. Henshaw. My initials were already printed in the assigned to field JTM Joshua Thomas Martin, which was unusual but not unheard of when the night supervisor pre-assigned requests based on location. I was closest to the 4th floor, had just finished bringing an elderly woman back from X-ray. So the logic tracked. Still, I found myself staring at those 3 letters longer than necessary, tracing their inkjet edges with my thumbnail. The 4th floor hallway stretched before me in that peculiar way institutional corridors do at night. Fluorescent tubes casting everything in shades of green-tinged white. Emergency exit signs providing the only variation in an otherwise monotonous palette. My cartwheels squeaked rhythmically as I pushed toward 417, the sound competing with the distant mechanical wheeze of the HVAC system. I'd walked this route hundreds of times, knew every scuff mark on the linoleum, every slightly misaligned ceiling panel, every room that tended to have its door propped open despite regulations. Room 417's door was closed. I knocked twice, protocol even for emergency transports, and waited the requisite 3 seconds before pushing it open. The room was dark except for the glow of monitoring equipment, screens displaying flat lines and zeros where vital signs should have registered. The bed was empty. Not empty as in freshly made and waiting for the next admission, but empty as in recently vacated, sheets twisted and bunched toward the foot of the mattress, one pillow bearing a distinct head-shaped indentation. I placed my palm against the mattress. Warm. Not body heat warm exactly, but warmer than room temperature, as though someone had been lying there within the last 15 or 20 minutes. The vinyl-covered foam held residual temperature the way it always did, that strange thermal memory that made every bed feel slightly alive. The restraints, soft cloth types used for confused or combative patients, hung unbuckled from the bed rails, their Velcro strips dangling loose. I checked the whiteboard mounted on the wall. Blank. The patient information board that should have displayed name. Attending physician, nurse assignment, and fall risk status was completely erased. Not even the ghost traces that cheap markers usually left behind. I pulled out my phone and accessed the hospital census system, scrolling to the 4th floor medical surgical unit. Room 417 was listed as unoccupied. Last discharge processed at 6:43 p.m. the previous evening, scheduled for terminal cleaning but not yet released for new admissions. The printer sound came again, muffled but distinct, emanating from the nurse's station down the hall. I left the empty room and walked toward the sound, passing closed doors and dimmed corridor lights. The station was deserted. Nancy, the night shift nurse, was probably doing rounds on the opposite end of the unit. But the printer was active, feeding another sheet into the output tray. I picked it up. Another transport request, identical format. Room 417. Patient name Callaway Marcus. Transfer destination CT imaging, requested by Dr. Henshaw. But this time, in the completed by field, my initials appeared with a timestamp. 02:54 a.m., 7 minutes ago. 7 minutes ago, I had been standing at that empty bed, palm pressed against warm sheets, trying to understand why I'd been sent to transport a patient who didn't exist. My hands started to shake, barely perceptible tremors that made the paper rattle. I set it down carefully on the counter and stepped back as though distance might change what I'd read. The printer remained silent now, its green ready light glowing steadily. I picked up the desk phone and dialed the night supervisor's extension. 4 rings, then voicemail. I tried Nancy's unit cell, straight to voicemail. Tried the transport dispatch line. Recording saying all operators were assisting other calls. I looked at both printed forms, laying them side by side under the desk lamp. The paper was identical, same weight and brightness, same hospital letterhead. The information was identical except for that single field, one showing assignment, one showing completion. The ink patterns were identical, suggesting they'd both come from the same printer, probably within minutes of each other. I checked the printer's job log on the computer. 2 entries, 02:47 a.m. transport request form, 02:53 a.m. transport completion confirmation. No record of who'd sent either job, the user field showing only system generated. I walked back to room 417, pushing my empty transport cart, its wheels squeaking in exact rhythm with my heartbeat. The door was still ajar from when I'd left it. I pushed it fully open and reached for the light switch, flooding the room with harsh overhead fluorescence. The bed looked different now. The sheets were pulled tighter, smoothed partially, though still showing evidence of recent occupancy. The pillow's indentation seemed deeper. One of the restraints had rebuckled itself, hanging properly from the left bed rail. I approached slowly, each step deliberate, watching the bed as though it might suddenly contain something that hadn't been there moments before. The mattress was still warm when I touched it, perhaps warmer than before, the vinyl surface radiating gentle heat against my palm. I checked under the bed, nothing but dust and a forgotten slipper. Checked the small bathroom, empty, toilet dry, sink dry, no sign of recent use. Checked the closet, empty except for spare linens and an extra pillow. The monitoring equipment was still on, screens still displaying zeros and flat lines. I examined the leads, the adhesive patches that would normally attach to a patient's chest to measure heart rhythm and blood oxygen. They were arranged on the bedside table, not discarded but carefully placed, adhesive backing still fresh and sticky as though recently removed. Someone had taken them off. Someone had been here. My phone buzzed. Text message from the dispatch system, automated notification. Transport request 417 completed 02:54 a.m. confirmed by JTM. Patient Callaway Marcus delivered CT imaging 03:02 a.m. I checked my watch. 3:08 a.m. According to the system, I'd completed this transport 6 minutes ago. According to reality, I was standing in an empty room trying to understand who or what I was supposed to have transported. I left the room and headed toward CT imaging, 2 floors down, accessible via the service elevator I used dozens of times each shift. The elevator descended with its usual grinding reluctance, cables creaking, car swaying slightly. The doors opened onto the basement level corridor, dimly lit and cool, walls lined with steam pipes and electrical conduit. CT imaging was 50 yards ahead, its reception area dark except for emergency lighting. The imaging suite door was locked, as it should be at this hour unless emergency scans were in progress. I pressed my face against the small wire-reinforced window, peering into the darkened waiting area. Empty chairs, dark reception desk, closed door leading to the scanner room. No lights, no activity, no indication that anyone had been here recently. I tried my universal access badge. It worked for most non-secured areas, but the lock didn't disengage. I knocked, waited, knocked again. Nothing. I pulled out my phone and checked the CT imaging schedule through the hospital system. No scans scheduled between midnight and 6 a.m. Last scan completed at 11:37 p.m., next scheduled at 6:15 a.m. No emergency procedures logged. No patient named Calloway Marcus in the system at all. Not in current census, not in recent discharges, not in the emergency department. Not registered anywhere in the hospital database. The printer sound came again, unmistakable, echoing from somewhere nearby. I followed it, walking past CT imaging toward the central supply area, past the morgue entrance, past the physical therapy equipment storage. The sound seemed to move, always just ahead, around the next corner, through the next door. I walked faster, cart abandoned at the elevator, following that distinctive mechanical stutter through corridors I knew and corridors I didn't recognize, deeper into the basement level than I'd ever ventured. I found a nurse's station, or something like one, in a section of basement I couldn't place on my mental map of the hospital. It had the right equipment, the right layout, but something about the proportions felt wrong. The ceiling lower than standard, the walls slightly closer together. The printer sat on the counter, green light glowing output tray containing a neat stack of forms. I counted them, 17 sheets, all transport requests. All room 417, patient Calloway, Marcus, destination CT imaging. All showing my initials in the assigned to field. All showing different timestamps ranging from 02:47 a.m. to 03:14 a.m. All showing my initials in the completed by field, with timestamps ranging from 02:54 a.m. to 03:21 a.m. The most recent form showed completion at 03:21 a.m. I checked my watch, 3:19 a.m. According to the system, I would complete this transport in 2 minutes. I was going to complete it, had already completed it, was completing it now in some version of this night that the hospital's documentation system understood better than I did. I heard the elevator ding, distant but distinct, the sound of arrival on this basement level. I heard cartwheels, that familiar squeak that matched my own abandoned cart, rolling closer through the corridors I'd just walked. I heard footsteps, pace and rhythm matching my own gait. I heard myself or something wearing my routines approaching this impossible nurse's station where I stood holding evidence of transports I hadn't performed for a patient who didn't exist. I had 2 choices. I could wait and see what arrived, see what version of myself had actually completed those transports, had actually delivered Marcus Calloway to CT imaging 17 times between 2:47 and 3:21 a.m. Or I could leave, return to the main hospital, file an incident report, tell someone that the system was documenting phantom transports. But I remembered the warm mattress, the recently unbuckled restraints, the monitoring leads with fresh adhesive. Someone had been in that bed. Someone had been transported. The system knew it, recorded it, confirmed it with my credentials. Perhaps I had transported them in moments I couldn't remember, through corridors I couldn't recall, delivering them to destinations that only existed in the hospital's digital memory. The cart sounds grew louder. I placed the stack of forms back in the printer's output tray, exactly as I'd found them, and stepped into the shadowed alcove beside the nurse's station. The wheels approached, steady and rhythmic, accompanied by breathing that matched my own slightly asthmatic pattern. A transport cart rolled into view, pushed by an orderly wearing my uniform, my badge, my face. I stopped at the nurse's station, picked up the stack of forms, and counted them carefully. 17 sheets. He seemed satisfied with this number, tucking them into his uniform pocket. Then he turned his cart around and wheeled back toward the elevator, whistling tunelessly. A habit I'd developed to fill the silence of long night shifts. I waited until the sound faded completely before stepping out of the alcove. The printer sat silent on the counter, its output tray empty now, green light glowing steadily. I walked to the elevator, pressed the call button, and rode back up to the 4th floor. The corridor looked exactly as it had an hour ago. Fluorescent tubes casting their green-tinged light, emergency exit signs glowing red. Room 417's door was closed. I didn't knock this time, just pushed it open. The bed was occupied now, patient lying still beneath neatly arranged sheets, monitoring equipment displaying steady rhythms. Heart rate 72, blood oxygen 98%, blood pressure 120/80. The restraints were buckled loosely around the patient's wrists. The whiteboard displayed a name: Calloway, Marcus. I approached the bed slowly. The patient was sleeping, or appeared to be sleeping, face peaceful in the dim room. I checked the wristband. Name correct. Medical record number present. Date of birth showing 43 years ago. I checked the chart at the foot of the bed. Admitted yesterday evening, diagnosis listed as altered mental status. Physician of record, Dr. Henshaw. My phone buzzed. Text message from dispatch. Transport request 417, patient Calloway, Marcus, destination CT imaging assigned to JTM. I checked the time. 3:34 a.m. The printer in the nurse's station down the hall stuttered to life, feeding a fresh form into its output tray. I looked at the patient, at Marcus Calloway, who hadn't existed an hour ago, who existed now fully documented and monitored and restrained in room 417. He opened his eyes just slightly and looked at me with an expression I recognized. The confusion of waking in an unfamiliar place, the disorientation of hospital stays that blurred together into a continuous present, without clear beginning or end. "Time for your scan," I heard myself say, reaching for the bed's wheel locks, beginning the familiar process of transfer preparation. He nodded slightly, already drifting back towards sleep, accepting this middle-of-the-night disruption as patients do, trusting that the system knew what it was doing, that the orderly knew where he was going, that everything had been properly scheduled and documented. I wheeled him out of room 417, down the corridor toward the elevator, past the nurse's station where the printer had already fallen silent again. The wheels squeaked in their familiar rhythm. My route was automatic, body navigating corridors my mind barely registered. We descended to the basement level. CT imaging was lit now, doors unlocked, technician waiting at the desk to receive my patient. I transferred Marcus Calloway to the imaging suite, helped position him on the scanner table, then stepped out to wait in the corridor. My phone showed 3:51 a.m. I pulled out the transport request form, the one I'd picked up from the nurse's station, and checked the timestamp, 02:47 a.m. The same form, the same request that had started this impossible loop. I thought about the stack of 17 forms I'd found in that basement nurse's station, each documenting a completion before it had been assigned. I thought about the version of myself I'd seen, pushing a cart through corridors I couldn't navigate, completing transports I couldn't remember. I thought about the warm, empty bed that became occupied only after I'd witnessed its emptiness. The CT technician emerged from the scanner room and gave me a thumbs up. Scan complete. Patient ready for return transport. I wheeled Marcus Calloway back to the elevator, back to the 4th floor, back to room 417. Helped him back into bed, rebuckled the restraints, confirmed he was comfortable. Marked the transport form as completed, timestamp 04:06 a.m. When I returned to the transport office at the end of my shift, my supervisor was reviewing the night's completed forms. She smiled at me, said I'd had a busy night, lots of transports for one shift. I looked at her screen. 23 completed transports attributed to my badge, spread across 6 hours. I remembered perhaps 12 of them. Lot of 417 last night, she noted, scrolling through the records. That Callaway patient kept you busy. 6 round trips to imaging. Poor guy must be complicated. 6 round trips, I remembered one. I remembered the empty bed, the phantom forms, the version of myself pushing a cart through impossible corridors. But the system documented 6, and the system was never wrong. The system tracked every badge swipe, every bed movement, every patient position change. The system knew I'd transported Marcus Callaway 6 times, and therefore I had, regardless of what I remembered or didn't remember. I clocked out at 7:03 a.m., walked to my car in the pre-dawn darkness, drove home through empty streets. But I kept checking my phone, half expecting another text from dispatch. Another transport request for room 417. Another loop that would pull me back into those basement corridors where multiple versions of the same transport existed simultaneously. The printer at St. Agnes Memorial runs 24 hours a day, generating forms and confirmations documenting the constant flow of patients through corridors and elevators, recording transports both completed and yet to be completed. Sometimes I wonder if I'm still down there wheeling Marcus Callaway through a night that never quite ends, fulfilling requests that print before they're assigned. Sometimes I wonder if the version that came home, the version sitting here now, is just another echo in the system, another phantom completing phantom transports for patients who exist only in the warm indentation of empty beds. Some transfers, I've learned, document themselves before you perform them, recording your route, your timing, your completion, all while you're still reading the initial request. The system has already logged your work in corridors you haven't walked yet, with patients you haven't met yet, at times that haven't arrived yet. And when you finally complete the task, you're not creating a record but confirming one that's been waiting for you all along, in the output tray of a printer that never stops feeding forms into the night. Story 2. The Room That Stayed Busy. I had been assigned to environmental services at Covenant Regional Medical Center for 7 years before they transferred me to the surgical floor. A lateral move, technically same pay grade and benefits, but requiring additional certification in biohazard cleaning and a higher security clearance for access to restricted areas. The transition happened in February during one of those administrative reshuffles that no one bothers explaining to lower-level staff. One day I was mopping pediatrics. The next I was attending a 3-day intensive course on surgical suite sanitation protocols, learning the difference between terminal cleaning and intraoperative turnover, memorizing the hierarchy of sterilization from clean to sterile to ultra-sterile. The surgical floor occupied the entire 3rd level of the hospital's west wing, a self-contained world of positive pressure ventilation, color-coded corridors, and strict separation between sterile and non-sterile zones. There were 12 operating rooms arranged in a rectangular formation around a central sterile processing hub, each room numbered consecutively from OR1 through OR12. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7:30 a.m., the quiet hours after elective surgeries concluded and before the morning's scheduled procedures began. My responsibility was terminal cleaning, the deep, methodical sanitization performed after each room's final case of the day, preparing the space for the next morning's first incision. The work was solitary and methodical. I would enter each darkened operating room with my specialized card. Fluorescent overhead lights replaced by dim perimeter LEDs that provided just enough illumination to work safely. The routine never varied. Remove all disposable drapes and materials, wipe down every surface with hospital-grade quaternary ammonium disinfectant, mop floors with figure-8 strokes moving from sterile field outward, document cleaning completion in the logbook, seal the room, move to the next. On average, terminal cleaning required 45 minutes per room. A full circuit took approximately 9 hours, accounting for supply restocking and brief breaks. OR-7 had been closed for renovation when I started. The room existed physically. I could see its door at the end of the south corridor, marked with the appropriate number and a yellow "Authorized Personnel Only" sign, but it never appeared on my assignment sheet. The door remained locked, accessible only with supervisor override credentials. When I asked my training coordinator about it, she explained that OR-7 had been taken offline for equipment upgrades and wouldn't reopen until the new fiscal year, possibly later depending on budget approvals. This made administrative sense. Hospitals constantly cycled operating rooms through renovation and modernization, upgrading aging infrastructure one room at a time to avoid completely shutting down surgical services. The notice came on a Tuesday, 3 months into my surgical floor assignment. A memo in my locker, printed on standard hospital stationery, stated that OR-7 had completed renovations ahead of schedule and required terminal cleaning before being released for surgical scheduling. The memo specified that I should perform the cleaning that night, Thursday, allowing time for environmental cultures to be collected Friday morning and analyzed before the room's official reopening the following Monday. The memo was signed by my supervisor, Patricia Holland, and included my personal employee ID in the reference field, confirming this was a direct assignment. I approached OR-7 at approximately 1:15 a.m. Friday morning, after completing my standard rotation through rooms 1 through 6. The yellow "Authorized Personnel Only" sign had been removed, replaced with a standard green "Room Available" indicator. I swiped my badge at the electronic lock. It beeped twice and disengaged with a heavy metallic click. I pushed the door open and reached for the light panel. The surgical lights were already on. Not the perimeter LEDs I typically worked under, but the main surgical lights, the massive overhead arrays that provided shadow-free illumination for operative procedures. They blazed at full intensity, creating a circle of brilliant white light centered on the operating table. The room was cold, far colder than the standard 64 degrees maintained in active surgical suites. My breath formed small clouds in the air. The operating table was dressed for surgery. Sterile blue drapes covered its surface, arranged in the precise configuration used to create a sterile field around a surgical site. Instruments were laid out on a Mayo stand positioned beside the table. Scalpels, forceps, retractors, all gleaming under the intense light, all arranged in the standardized order that surgical techs learned during their training. A suction canister hung from the side of the table, its clear plastic container empty but its vacuum pump humming softly, drawing air through tubing that terminated in a Yankauer suction tip resting on the sterile field. I stood in the doorway, hands still on the light panel, trying to process what I was seeing. The room should have been empty, stripped of all disposable materials after its last procedure before renovation, then deep cleaned and left bare except for fixed equipment. Instead, it looked exactly like an operating room looks during the 15-minute setup period immediately preceding a scheduled case, fully prepared, waiting only for the surgical team and patient. I checked my phone. 1:22 a.m. I checked the surgical schedule posted outside the room. No cases listed for OR-7. No cases scheduled until Monday at 7:30 a.m. I checked my assignment memo again. Terminal cleaning required, implying the room had been left in post-operative condition and needed my services to restore it to pre-operative status. I stepped fully into the room, letting the door swing closed behind me. The temperature seemed to drop further, cold enough that I wished I'd worn a jacket over my scrubs. I approached the operating table slowly, scanning for any indication of recent use. Blood on the drapes, used instruments, biological material in the suction canister. Everything was pristine. The drapes showed no stains or wrinkles. The instruments showed no residue or dulling of their polished surfaces. The suction canister contained no fluid. I reached for the Mayo stand, intending to begin the breakdown process by removing instruments to my contaminated materials container. Before my gloved hand touched the nearest scalpel, I heard voices. Muffled, distant, but unmistakably human voices engaged in the practiced shorthand of intraoperative communication. A male voice saying "Bovie," meaning electrocautery device. A female voice responding "Bovie" to surgeon, confirming transfer of the requested instrument. Another voice, partially obscured by what sounded like a surgical mask, requesting irrigation and suction. The voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, not echoing through the room but somehow embedded in its structure, vibrating through walls and floor and surgical equipment. I spun around, scanning the space, looking for speakers or communication devices that might be replaying recorded audio. The room was empty except for standard equipment. No personnel, no speakers, no visible source for the voices. The suction pump's hum intensified briefly and I heard wet sounds. The distinct noise of suction removing blood and irrigation fluid from a surgical field. A sound I'd heard countless times while cleaning rooms after procedures. The suction canister remained empty, its clear plastic showing no accumulation of fluid, but the sound was unmistakable. Then the smell hit me. Electrocautery, that characteristic burning odor created when high-frequency electrical current cuts through tissue while simultaneously sealing blood vessels. The smell was strong and immediate, exactly as it would be if someone were actively using a Bovie device in this room right now. I backed toward the door, hands fumbling for my phone. I needed to call my supervisor, report that OR7 appeared to have active personnel conducting an unauthorized procedure. But when I pulled out my phone, the screen showed 1:24 a.m. Only 2 minutes had passed since I'd entered the room, though my interaction with the impossible surgery felt longer. I dialed Patricia's mobile number. It rang 5 times, then voicemail. I dialed the Nightshift nursing supervisor. 4 rings, voicemail. I dialed hospital security, recording stating all operators were assisting other calls. The voices stopped. The suction pump fell silent. The smell of burning tissue faded. I turned back toward the operating table. The Mayo stand was bare. Instruments gone. The sterile drapes remained, but they were arranged differently now, folded and tucked in a configuration that suggested a different type of procedure. Abdominal surgery, perhaps, rather than the orthopedic setup the instrument selection had implied. I approached again, more cautious this time, watching the room for any change, any flicker of movement or sound that might warn me before the voices returned. I reached the operating table and placed my hand on the drapes. They were warm, distinctly warmer than the frigid ambient temperature. Warm the way fabric becomes when human hands have been handling it, folding it, arranging it into position. I looked up at the surgical lights. They blazed steadily, no flicker or fluctuation. I examined the light heads, looking for any modification or damage that might explain their activation when I'd entered. The controls were standard, a sterile touchpad mounted on the light suspension system currently showing inactive status, meaning the lights were off, not illuminated, certainly not blazing at the intensity currently flooding the room. I left the operating table and walked to the room's environmental controls, a wall-mounted panel that regulated temperature, humidity, and air pressure. The digital display showed normal parameters, 64.2 degrees Fahrenheit, 48% relative humidity, positive pressure differential of 0.03 inches of water. According to the sensors, the room was not cold. According to my visible breath and numb fingers, it was. I pulled my cleaning cart into the room and began the terminal cleaning process, following the protocol I'd performed hundreds of times before. If the room was experiencing technical malfunctions, lighting systems activating spontaneously, audio equipment playing phantom recordings, environmental sensors providing false readings, that was beyond my scope of responsibility. My job was to clean the room, document its readiness, seal it, and report any anomalies through the proper channels. I started with the operating table, removing the sterile drapes and depositing them in the biohazard hamper on my cart. As soon as I pulled the first drape away, the voices returned clearer now, close enough that they seemed to originate from just over my shoulder. A female voice saying, "Pressure's dropping. Systolic 85. A male voice responding, "Increase fluids, push 1 liter bolus." A third voice, calm and measured, stating, "More suction here, I need to see." I froze, drape clutched in my gloved hands, listening to an emergency scenario unfold in the empty air beside me. The conversation continued with practiced urgency, requests for medications, updates on vital signs, terse commands to adjust anesthesia. This wasn't background chatter or casual conversation replayed from some hidden device. This was an active surgical crisis, the kind of situation where every second mattered and communication happened in efficient, emotionless bursts, focused entirely on patient stabilization. The voices stopped again when I completed removing the drapes. I continued working, methodically wiping down every surface, moving in my standard pattern from sterile field outward. Each time I completed a task, removing materials, wiping a surface, mopping a section of floor, the voices would return briefly, snippets of conversation that seemed to correspond to different phases of the phantom procedure, requests for instruments during what sounded like the opening phase, urgent exchanges during an apparent complication, subdued, relieved tones during what might have been successful resolution and closure. I checked my phone periodically. Time advanced normally, 1:47 a.m., 2:03 a.m., 2:21 a.m. But the work felt slower, each task requiring more effort than usual, as though I were moving through resistance, through the residual presence of events that had either occurred here or were somehow still occurring, layered over my present like translucent overlays that I could hear and smell, but not see. By 2:35 a.m. I had completed the terminal cleaning process. The room looked exactly as it should. Empty operating table, clean surfaces, mopped floors, waste properly disposed of. Equipment returned to standard positions. I filled out the cleaning log, noting completion time and signing my initials. I made no mention of the voices or the cold or the lights that burned while their controls indicated they were off. How would I document such things? Room appeared to contain invisible surgery in progress. Experienced auditory hallucinations consistent with operating room sounds. Environmental sensors contradicted sensory evidence. I pushed my cart out of OR7, sealed the door, and moved on to OR8. The rest of my shift proceeded normally, each room requiring the expected 45 minutes of cleaning. No anomalies encountered. At 7:15 a.m., I returned my cart to the housekeeping station, clocked out, and walked to my car through the hospital's employee parking structure. That afternoon, after sleeping poorly and waking with a persistent headache, I called the hospital's Human Resources Department and asked to review my personnel file. The request raised no concerns. Employees had rights to access their own records, and by 5 p.m. I was sitting in a small conference room with a thick manila folder containing my employment history. The file documented my hire date, my initial assignment to pediatrics, my performance reviews, my certification training for surgical floor work, my transfer memo. I flipped through incident reports, attendance records, payroll confirmations, looking for anything unusual. Any gap or inconsistency that might explain why I'd been specifically assigned to clean OR7. Near the back of the file, I found a document I didn't recognize. A surgical services log sheet, the type used to track personnel presence during operative procedures. The log was dated 6 years ago during my second year at the hospital, long before my transfer to surgical services. It documented a procedure in OR7, emergency exploratory laparotomy, start time 11:47 p.m., completion time 3:15 a.m. The surgical team was listed: attending surgeon, assisting surgeon, anesthesiologist, circulating nurse, surgical tech. And at the bottom, in the section reserved for non-medical support personnel, a single entry: Environmental Services Room Support J. Morrison. My name, my employee ID number, my signature, or something very much like my signature, confirming my presence in that operating room for the duration of a 3.5-hour emergency surgery I had absolutely no memory of attending. I checked my work records for that date. I had been scheduled for the overnight shift in pediatrics, my standard assignment at that time. I checked my time card. I had clocked in at 11 p.m. and out at 7:30 a.m., consistent with my regular hours. 8.5 hours on the pediatrics floor, except according to this surgical log, I had also been in OR7 from 11:47 p.m. to 3:15 a.m., providing environmental services support during an active procedure, something I had never been trained to do, never been asked to do, never done in my entire career at Covenant Regional. I photographed the document with my phone and returned the file to Human Resources. That evening, I searched the hospital's digital archives for any record of the procedure documented in that log. I found nothing: no patient admission matching that date and procedure type, no surgical billing records, no anesthesia documentation, no post-operative notes. The only evidence the surgery had occurred was the log sheet in my personnel file claiming I had been there, had witnessed it, had signed confirmation of my participation. I returned to work Sunday night, my next scheduled shift. OR7 was on my assignment list again, marked for routine terminal cleaning following standard renovation protocols. I approached the room at 1:30 a.m., after completing my circuit through the other active operating rooms. The door was locked, electronic badge reader showing red. I tried my badge. Double beep, denial of access. I tried again, same result. I called my supervisor. Patricia answered this time, voice groggy with sleep. I explained that OR7 was on my assignment list, but the door wouldn't accept my credentials. She put me on hold for several minutes, then returned and said the room had been removed from the schedule, had been reclosed for additional technical work, wouldn't require cleaning until further notice. She sounded confused, uncertain why the room had appeared on my assignment sheet if it wasn't ready for service. I hung up and stood outside OR7, looking at its locked door, its dark window, its electronic reader glowing red in the dimmed corridor. I pressed my ear against the door. For a long moment I heard nothing, just the ambient hum of the hospital's mechanical systems. Then, faint but distinct, I heard voices. Muffled conversation, practiced and urgent, coordinating actions in the specialized language of intraoperative care. I heard my name. Not Morrison, but J.M. Suction. A voice requesting my presence, my assistance, giving me instructions in the shorthand that surgical teams used with familiar personnel. I heard a second voice confirming, J.M. on suction. I heard the wet sounds of fluid being evacuated from a surgical field. Heard the hum of the pump drawing material through tubing that I would be holding. In a procedure I would be assisting. In a room I had no authorization to enter. I placed my palm against the door. It was warm, warmer than body temperature. Warm the way surfaces become when occupied by living people working under intense lights. I felt vibration through the door, subtle but rhythmic, like the vibration of machinery operating, hearts beating, blood pumping through vessels and tubes and suction canisters. The hospital's surgical logs are maintained in perpetuity, documenting every procedure, every personnel member, every moment of operative time. Some logs document procedures that appear in no other record, surgeries that exist only in the signatures of people who claim no memory of attending them. in rooms that were supposedly closed during hours that time cards say were spent elsewhere. And some rooms, I've learned, continue performing these phantom procedures indefinitely, replaying them or perhaps never stopping them, cycling through emergency scenarios that require the presence of specific personnel who attended once, or are attending now, or will attend eventually when called by voices that know their names and know exactly what instruments to request and know that JM is trained on suction and can be counted on to respond when the surgical field needs clearing. Or 7 reopened officially last month, released for scheduling after what administrators called an extended renovation period. It's booked solid now, 3 to 4 cases daily, completely integrated into the surgical rotation. I've cleaned it 6 times since reopening terminal cleaning after the last procedure of each day, arriving to find it in standard post-operative condition. Used drapes, utilized instruments, documented procedures with documented personnel. Normal in every way. Except sometimes while I'm working alone in the sealed room, I hear my name called by voices that aren't present, requesting assistance with a suction device I'm not holding. During a procedure that isn't happening, in a surgery that somehow needs me there even though I'm only the person who cleans the room after everyone else has gone home. Story 3, the reappearing bedpan. The intensive care unit at Mercy General operates on rhythms different from the rest of the hospital. Not the predictable cycles of shift changes and meal deliveries, but the erratic pulse of machines keeping vigil over bodies that hover in the space between viability and system failure. I worked ICU support for 4 years, a position that occupied the hospital's lower hierarchy, handling the tasks nurses no longer had time for as patient-to-staff ratios steadily worsened. My responsibilities included turning immobile patients to prevent pressure ulcers, assisting with transfers from bed to chair, managing the endless cycle of soiled linens and maintaining the supply of basic care items that sustained patients too sick to manage their own bodily functions. The bedpan entered my awareness on a Tuesday during the overnight shift, between the 2 a.m. medication round and the 4 a.m. vital signs check. I found it on my supply cart, nested among clean linens I'd just retrieved from the 3rd-floor storage closet. It was stainless steel, institutional grade, worn smooth by decades of use and industrial sanitization. The hospital had mostly transitioned to disposable bedpans, molded paper pulp products that could be disposed of after single use. But a few dozen steel pans remained in circulation for patients whose size or condition made the disposable versions impractical. The bedpan was soiled, not heavily but enough that it had clearly been used and improperly returned to circulation without passing through the sanitization process. It contained perhaps 3 ounces of urine, pale yellow and dilute, along with flecks of tissue paper. The smell was sharp and immediate, cutting through the ICU's ambient odor of disinfectant and mechanical ventilation. I was irritated but not surprised. Mistakes happened constantly on night shift, protocols shortcut in the interest of time. Contaminated items occasionally ending up in clean supply areas when overworked staff took the path of least resistance. I transported the bedpan to the soiled utility room, dumped its contents into the designated disposal unit, and placed it in the stainless steel holding bin that housekeeping collected 3 times per shift for central sterilization. 90 minutes later, I found it again. Same cart, same position, nested among linens that had been clean when I'd checked them after depositing the contaminated bedpan in the soiled utility room. It contained urine again, slightly more this time, perhaps 4 ounces. Same pale yellow color. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to construct a narrative that made sense. Perhaps housekeeping had already collected the soiled items bin and rushed the bedpan through sterilization. Then some nurse had used it again and mistakenly returned it to my cart. The timeline was tight but possible if multiple people moved with efficiency. I disposed of it again, same process, same holding bin. This time I made a note of the bedpan's identifying marks. All hospital equipment bore engraved inventory numbers, checking the rim for its stamped code. I found it, MP-6783. I wrote this in my pocket notepad along with the time, 03:47 a.m. At 5:20 a.m. I discovered it a third time. Same cart, same position, same approximate volume of pale yellow urine, MP-6783. I felt something shift in my perception, a sensation like standing on a surface that appeared solid until you tested your weight and felt it give slightly, revealing hidden instability beneath. I checked the soiled utility room. The holding bin contained the items I'd deposited earlier. Several disposable items, a plastic urinal, 2 wash basins, but no stainless steel bedpan. I checked the collection log, a clipboard where housekeeping initialed each pickup. One collection documented at 2:30 a.m., one at 5 a.m. Neither mentioned retrieving stainless steel items for sterilization. I carried the bedpan directly to housekeeping's central processing facility, a secure area in the hospital's basement where contaminated items underwent mechanical washing and high-temperature sterilization. The night shift supervisor, a man named Gerald who I'd worked with for years, looked at me with tired confusion when I explained my concern. MP-6783 keeps reappearing on my cart after I dispose of it, I said, holding the bedpan carefully away from my body despite my double-gloved hands. 3 times tonight, same pan, same identifying number. Gerald took the bedpan and examined the inventory code. He walked to his computer terminal and entered the number into the equipment tracking system. Last logged sterilization was Saturday at 1400 hours, he said, reading from the screen. Nothing since then. No record of us receiving it tonight. I've put it in the soiled utility bin twice, I insisted. Your staff should have collected it during the 2:30 and 5 a.m. pickups. He pulled up the collection logs on his system, scanning the documented items. No stainless bedpans on either list, he confirmed. Plenty of disposables, other items, but no steel. You sure you're using the right bin? Maybe you're putting it somewhere else. I started to argue, but caught myself. How could I prove I'd disposed of it correctly if the system showed no record of its arrival? I thanked Gerald, took the bedpan back, and returned to the ICU. Instead of disposing of it again, I decided to secure it in a location I could monitor continuously. I placed it in a locked cabinet in the ICU break room, a small storage space accessible only to staff with proper credentials. I used my personal padlock, one I'd brought from home for my locker, securing the cabinet door and keeping the only key. The rest of my shift passed without incident. I checked the locked cabinet twice, 06:30 a.m. and 07:15 a.m., finding the bedpan exactly where I'd left it. I finished my final rounds, completed my documentation, and clocked out at 07:45 a.m. Before leaving, I checked the cabinet one more time. The bedpan sat on the shelf, my padlock secure on the cabinet door. I returned Thursday night for my next scheduled shift, clocking in at 11 p.m. and receiving report from the evening support staff. The night was unusually busy, 2 admissions requiring complete bed setup, 1 patient transfer to a step-down unit, multiple linen changes for patients with loose bowels or bleeding. I didn't think about the bedpan until nearly 2 a.m., when I opened my supply cart and found it nested among fresh linens containing approximately 3 ounces of pale yellow urine. MP-6783. I stood motionless, hands frozen on the cart's handle, while my mind tried to process what I was seeing. I had locked that bedpan in a cabinet 2 nights ago. I hadn't unlocked the cabinet. I didn't even have the key with me. It was at home on my keychain 30 miles away. Yet here was the bedpan contaminated and present, occupying my cart as though it had never left. I ran to the break room, fumbling with the ICU's master key that could open the cabinet despite my personal lock. The cabinet door was secured, my padlock intact. Inside, the shelf was empty except for a few protein bar wrappers left by other staff. No bedpan. I closed the cabinet and walked slowly back to my cart where the bedpan waited, urine gently sloshing as the cart shifted under the ICU's air pressure differentials. I pulled out my phone and photographed it. Timestamp, 2:13 a.m. Clear image showing the bedpan, the inventory code, the pale yellow contents. Then I carried it to the charge nurse's station where Diana, a 20-year veteran ICU nurse, was reviewing medication orders. I need to report something unusual, I began, setting the bedpan carefully on the counter. She glanced at it, face registering automatic distaste. That's contaminated. Why are you bringing it here? I explained the situation as concisely as possible. The repeated reappearances, the disposal attempts, the locked cabinet, the impossible return. I showed her my photograph, pointed out the timestamp and inventory code. I watched her expression shift from annoyance to confusion to carefully maintained neutrality. The professional masked nurses developed to avoid showing alarm that might upset patients or families. "Where did you find this tonight?" she asked. "On my cart. I opened it at 2:10 a.m. and it was there, nested in clean linens. And you're certain you locked the same bedpan, same inventory number in the break room cabinet Tuesday morning?" "Yes. Used my personal padlock. The cabinet is still locked." She stood and walked to the break room, checked the cabinet herself, confirmed the lock and the empty shelf. She returned to the nurse's station and accessed the hospital's equipment tracking system on her computer, entering MP-6783. "Last sterilization logged Saturday," she said, echoing what Gerald had told me. "No recent sterilization cycles, no check-in or check-out logged." She clicked through several more screens, then stopped, staring at something that made her lean closer to the monitor. "What?" I asked. "Your badge," she said quietly. "System shows your badge ID accessing the equipment database 93 times in the last 72 hours. 93 entries for MP-6783, all showing item checked out to you, then returned for sterilization, then checked out again. Logged in a continuous cycle. That's impossible. I haven't accessed that system. I don't even know how to access it. I'm support staff, not inventory management." She turned the monitor toward me. The entries scrolled down the screen, each showing my badge number, employee name, timestamp, action code. Checked out 02:47 a.m. Thursday. Returned for sterilization 02:53 a.m. Thursday. Checked out 03:09 a.m. Thursday. Returned for sterilization 03:14 a.m. Thursday. The pattern repeated identically. Entries logged every 15 to 20 minutes around the clock, including hours when I wasn't working, when I was home sleeping or running errands or doing anything except checking equipment in and out of a hospital database. "Someone's cloning badges," Diana said, though her tone carried no conviction. Badge cloning was theoretically possible but required sophisticated equipment and intimate knowledge of hospital security protocols. "I'll file a report with security. Meanwhile, dispose of that bedpan in the soiled utility room and I'll personally walk it down to housekeeping." We followed her plan. I emptied the bedpan, placed it in the holding bin. Diana witnessed this action and then carried the entire bin to the basement, bypassing the usual collection system. She returned 20 minutes later and confirmed she'd handed the bedpan directly to Gerald, watched him place it in the sterilization queue, watched the machine's door close on it before she left. At 4:35 a.m., I found it on my cart again. Same position, same approximate volume of pale yellow urine, same inventory code, I stood in the corridor outside room 7, holding the bedpan in trembling hands, while the ICU's machines beeped their steady rhythms and the ventilators hissed their mechanical breaths. I thought about the database entries, the impossible checkout cycle attributed to my badge. I thought about Diana personally delivering the bedpan to sterilization. I thought about locked cabinets and disposal bins and the complete failure of every attempt to remove this object from my presence. I set it on the cart and continued my shift. When I found it again at 6:15 a.m., nested in linens I'd personally retrieved from locked storage only minutes before, I simply emptied it and returned it to my cart. When I found it again at 7:30 a.m., I did the same. I clocked out at 7:48 a.m. and drove home in early morning traffic, the sun bright and normal and indifferent to the impossible object that kept cycling through my work night. At home, I searched hospital records, old incident reports, any documentation that might mention MP-6783 or unusual equipment phenomena in the ICU. I found one brief mention in a nurse's note from 6 years prior. Patient in room 9 extremely agitated overnight, claiming staff repeatedly bringing bedpan despite not requesting one. Patient became combative, required sedation. Family reported patient has baseline dementia, episodes of confusion common. The note mentioned no inventory numbers, no specific equipment, but the timestamp showed overnight shift and the location was ICU. I returned to work Saturday night. The bedpan appeared 17 times during my shift. I stopped counting after that, stopped being surprised each time I opened a cart or cabinet or supply room and found it waiting, its contents varying slightly. Sometimes 3 ounces, sometimes 5, sometimes clear and dilute, sometimes concentrated and dark, sometimes containing traces of blood that testing strips confirmed was human. I emptied it mechanically each time, stopped attempting disposal, stopped reporting its presence. It had become part of my routine, a responsibility that had somehow attached itself to me the way chronic conditions attach to patients, requiring constant management but offering no cure. The equipment tracking system now shows 847 checkout cycles attributed to my badge, all for MP-6783. All documenting a continuous loop of access and return that spans every hour of every day regardless of my physical location or employment status. I've received no disciplinary action for this impossible usage pattern, no inquiry from security or inventory management. The system documents it, archives it, accepts it as normal. Last month I requested a transfer to a different unit, different floor, attempting to leave the ICU and its reappearing bedpan behind. My transfer was approved. I now work orthopedic support, day shift, a world away from ICU rhythms. I haven't seen MP-6783 in 3 weeks. But 2 days ago I found a different object on my supply cart, a stainless steel wash basin, inventory code WB-2159, containing several ounces of soapy water and a used washcloth. I checked the equipment database. 96 entries logged to my badge in the past 72 hours, all for WB-2159, all showing the same continuous checkout and return pattern that had characterized the bedpan. I accessed my personnel file through human resources, requesting any documents related to equipment assignments or lost item reports. I found something I didn't remember seeing before, an incident report from 8 years ago, my first month at Mercy General, documenting that I'd failed to properly dispose of contaminated equipment, had left soiled items in clean storage areas, had created multiple potential infection control violations. The report listed specific inventory codes, MP-6783 WB-2159 and 6 other items I'd never consciously encountered. The report was signed by a supervisor whose name I didn't recognize, witnessed by staff whose employment I couldn't verify. The report concluded with a notation: Employee education provided regarding proper contaminated equipment disposal. Employee to demonstrate competency through supervised equipment handling. Equipment to be assigned to employee for continuous tracking until proper disposal protocols mastered. I have no memory of this incident, this education, this competency demonstration. I have no memory of mishandling equipment or requiring special supervision. But according to the documentation, I was assigned 8 specific items to manage, track, dispose of properly, and I've successfully cleared only one of them from my continuous tracking requirement in 8 years of employment. 7 items remain, objects that appear on my carts and in my storage areas and among my supplies, containing contents that vary, requiring disposal that never completes, documenting usage patterns that span time I'm not working and locations I'm not occupying. The hospital's equipment system tracks them faithfully, logging every cycle, every checkout attributed to my badge, maintaining a permanent record of my relationship with objects I can't successfully dispose of, no matter how many times I try. Some equipment, I've learned, tracks the employee rather than the employee tracking the equipment. It appears where you work, follows you between assignments, populates your database records with usage patterns that demonstrate your continuing failure to complete a task you don't remember being assigned. And some competency demonstrations never end, continuing indefinitely as you attempt to master a skill that seems simple, disposing of contaminated items, but reveals itself as impossible when the items refuse to stay disposed of, returning instead to your cart with fresh contents, ready for another cycle, another attempt, another documented failure that extends your remedial training into a career-long requirement. Story 4, the sheet that didn't stay folded. The laundry system at Highland Park Medical Center processed approximately 4,200 pounds of linens daily, a continuous industrial operation that ran 3 shifts around the clock in the hospital's sub-basement facility. My position as linen orderly placed me at the system's end point, receiving clean items from the automated folding machinery and distributing them to color-coded storage racks according to a complex organizational hierarchy. White sheets and pillowcases on the west wall, blue surgical drapes on the north wall, green exam table covers on the east wall, yellow isolation gowns on the south wall. The work was physically demanding but mentally restful, requiring no complex decision-making, no interaction with patients or families, no responsibility beyond maintaining the flow of clean linens from basement processing to upper-floor storage closets. I worked alone most nights, the only linen services staff scheduled between midnight and 8 a.m. The sub-basement was quiet except for machinery sounds, the industrial washer's rhythmic churning, the dryer's hot wind rush, the folding machine's pneumatic hiss and clack. Occasionally, maintenance staff would pass through, checking boiler pressures or investigating pipe leaks. But most nights I saw no one, just moved through my routine of collecting folded stacks from the machinery, transporting them to the appropriate racks, then restocking the hospital's floor-level linen closets during the early morning hours when patient care activity reached its nightly minimum. The sheet first appeared on a Wednesday in March, emerging from folding machine 3 during the 2 a.m. processing cycle. It was a standard flat sheet, 60% cotton and 40% polyester blend, size double, color white, inventory code woven into one corner, identifying it as hospital property. I noticed it because it didn't stay folded. The folding machine processed sheets in a specific sequence, feed the sheet lengthwise through alignment rollers, machine sensors detect corners and edges, pneumatic arms execute a series of precise folds resulting in a compact rectangle approximately 15 inches by 20 inches stacked and ready for storage. This sheet completed the folding sequence normally, emerging as a neat rectangle that I placed on my transport cart with 24 other identical rectangles. But by the time I reached the storage rack, Perhaps 90 seconds later, it had unfolded itself. Not completely, not into the spread configuration it would assume on a bed, but partially unfolded, extending to approximately 3 feet by 6 feet, lying across the top of my cart in a shape that resembled a body position. Head area distinct, torso area wider, foot area narrower. The kind of outline that forms when someone lies on their back on a flat surface. I refolded it manually, standard procedure for items that occasionally escape the folding machine imperfectly creased. I placed it back on the cart, this time positioning it in the middle of the stack rather than on top, secured by the weight of other folded sheets. When I reached the storage rack 60 seconds later and began transferring the stack, the sheet had migrated back to the top and unfolded again, same position, same body-shaped outline. I examined it closely under the harsh fluorescent lights of the linen storage area. The fabric showed no defects, no tears or stains or structural damage that might prevent it from holding a fold. The corners were intact, properly hemmed, no loose threads or fraying. The texture was consistent throughout, no areas of unusual stiffness or unusual limpness. It appeared identical to the hundreds of other sheets processed that night, indistinguishable in every measurable way except its refusal to remain folded. I refolded it a second time very precisely, matching corners exactly, creating sharp creases, then immediately placed it on the storage rack's top shelf where I could observe it continuously. I watched for 5 minutes, standing motionless in the quiet sub-basement studying the folded rectangle. It remained folded. I turned away, pushed my empty cart back toward the folding machines, and within 3 steps heard a soft rustling sound behind me. The sheet had unfolded again. Same position, same body-shaped outline lying across the storage rack shelf as though deliberately arranged by invisible hands. I picked it up, examined both sides carefully, found nothing unusual except the ongoing behavior. I carried it to my small office adjacent to the laundry processing area and spread it fully on my desk. The sheet measured standard dimensions, 81 inches by 96 inches, suitable for a hospital bed mattress. I checked the woven inventory code, LS-4492. I accessed the laundry management software, a system that tracked every linen item's complete life cycle from purchase through processing to eventual disposal, when wear rendered items unsuitable for continued use. I entered LS-4492 and waited while the database searched. The sheet's record appeared on screen, purchased 6 years ago as part of a bulk order. Entered circulation after initial industrial washing, assigned to general medical surgical floor rotation. The processing history showed 3,218 wash cycles, average for a sheet of its age and usage pattern. Then I noticed the dates. The wash cycles weren't distributed normally. Most of the sheet's processing had occurred in a compressed time period, 6 years ago, during a 3-month span from August through October. During those 3 months, LS-4492 had been washed 273 times, sometimes multiple times per day, sometimes with less than 4 hours between cycles. After October of that year, processing frequency dropped to normal patterns, once or twice per week, until approximately 18 months ago, when frequency began increasing again. In the past year and a half, the sheet had been washed 942 times. I cross-referenced the processing dates with hospital census data, looking for any unusual patient admissions or room usage patterns that might explain why a single sheet would require such frequent washing. I found nothing remarkable. Standard admission rates, standard length of stay statistics, no outbreaks or incidents that would have generated unusually high laundry volumes. I checked the processing tags, codes added to laundry items when they came from specific hospital areas. LS-4492 showed tags from room 314 for the majority of its high-frequency cycles. I accessed the hospital's room history database, searching for room 314. The room was a standard medical surgical patient room on the third floor of the main tower, double occupancy, equipped for general care. I scrolled through its occupancy records looking for anything unusual during the periods when LS-4492 was being processed multiple times daily. 6 years ago, during August through October, room 314 had housed a patient named Evelyn Marsh, female, 78 years old, admitted for pneumonia that progressed to sepsis and multi-organ failure. Her length of stay was 87 days. She had died in that room on October 19th. I returned to the linen storage area. The sheet still lay on the rack where I'd left it, still arranged in its body-shaped outline. I picked it up, refolded it again, and this time I placed it directly into a disposal bag, a heavy plastic sack used for linens too damaged or contaminated for continued use. I sealed the bag, carried it to the disposal staging area, and placed it with other items scheduled for incineration pickup the following morning. I completed my shift, restocked the floor-level linen closets, clocked out at 8 a.m., and drove home through morning traffic. That night, when I returned for my next scheduled shift, I found the sheet on my transport cart, unfolded into its characteristic body shape, lying across the cart as though waiting for me. LS-4492. Unmistakable inventory code woven into the corner. I checked the disposal staging area. The sealed bag I'd placed there was gone, collected by the morning shift and transported to the incinerator facility according to standard protocol. I checked the laundry management software. LS-4492 showed a new processing entry. Washed and dried that afternoon at 4:30 p.m., folded and returned to circulation at 5:45 p.m. Processed by code indicated my badge ID. I hadn't been at the hospital at 4:30 p.m. I'd been home, sleeping in preparation for my midnight shift. I certainly hadn't processed any laundry. Yet the system documented my involvement, recorded my badge as the authorizing credential for returning this specific sheet to active inventory. I carried the sheet back to my office and examined it again. This time looking for any marking or characteristic I'd missed before. I found something I hadn't noticed during my previous inspections. Faint indentations in the fabric, barely perceptible patterns of compression that formed lines and contours across the sheet's surface. The patterns were geometric, regular, concentrated in specific areas: head region, shoulder region, hip region, heel region. The kind of pressure marks that form when weight rests on fabric for extended periods, when a body lies motionless on a sheet for hours or days, when someone is bedridden and unable to shift position. The indentations appeared permanent, pressed into the fabric's weave at a molecular level that standard washing and drying couldn't erase. I could trace them with my fingertips, feeling the subtle topography, the permanent record of a body that had occupied this sheet for long enough to reshape its structure. I researched Evelyn Marsh, the patient who had occupied room 314 during the period when LS-4492 was being processed multiple times daily. I found her obituary: beloved mother and grandmother, survived by 2 daughters and 5 grandchildren, worked 34 years as an elementary school librarian, died peacefully at Highland Park Medical Center surrounded by family. The obituary mentioned no details of her final months, the 87 days of declining health, the progressive organ failure, the transition from curative care to comfort care that her medical records documented with clinical precision. I found nursing notes from her final weeks. Patient increasingly unresponsive. Minimal interaction with environment, requires complete care for all activities of daily living. Repositioning every 2 hours to prevent pressure ulcers, though skin integrity declining despite interventions. Family maintaining constant bedside presence, daughters taking turns staying overnight. I found a note from October 18th, the day before her death. Patient bed linens changed 4 times during shift due to profuse sweating and incontinence. Nursing staff noting unusual difficulty managing patient comfort, sheets becoming soaked within 1 to 2 hours despite maximum absorbency products. Laundry services delivering replacement linens to room every 2 hours. Family requesting we do everything possible to maintain patient comfort in final hours. I understood then why LS-4492 had been processed 273 times in 3 months. It had been one of the sheets cycling through room 314 during Evelyn Marsh's final days. Used for 2 hours, soaked, removed, processed, returned, used again. Soaked, removed, processed, returned, in an endless rotation designed to maintain some minimal level of comfort for a dying woman whose body was systematically shutting down. I looked at the sheet spread across my desk, at its body-shaped outline, at the permanent indentations marking where a head had rested, where shoulders had pressed down, where hips had compressed the fabric hour after hour, day after day, during 87 days of progressive decline. The sheet held a memory of that body, a permanent impression that washing and drying and folding couldn't erase. I took the sheet to folding machine 3 and fed it through manually, watching it progress through the alignment sequence, through the automated folds, emerging as a neat rectangle. I placed it on my cart and pushed toward the storage rack. Before I traveled 10 feet, the rustling sound began. I stopped and looked down. The sheet was unfolding, spreading across the cart, resuming its body-shaped outline with the patient insistence of water finding its level. I tried different approaches over the following nights. I processed the sheet through different folding machines. I washed it at higher temperatures using extra rinse cycles, trying to eliminate whatever molecular memory or structural fatigue allowed it to unfold itself. I stored it in different locations. Bottom shelves, top shelves, compressed under heavy stacks of other linens. It always reappeared on my cart within an hour or two. Always unfolded, always arranged in that distinctive shape. I checked the laundry management software repeatedly. The processing entries continued accumulating, all attributed to my badge, all showing the same cycle. Processed, folded, returned to circulation, processed again. The frequency was increasing. During my first week with the sheet, it was processed once per shift. By the second week, twice per shift. By the third week, sometimes 4 or 5 times the software documenting cycles during hours I wasn't working, showing my badge authorizing processing I never initiated. I contacted the hospital's information technology department, reporting that my badge credentials appeared to be compromised, used to access systems I hadn't accessed. The IT technician ran a security audit, found no evidence of unauthorized badge usage or system intrusion, suggested I was mistaken about the timestamps or had perhaps accessed the systems without remembering doing so during busy shifts. I requested a new badge with different credentials. The replacement badge showed the same processing patterns within 48 hours, accumulating LS-4492 wash cycles attributed to my new ID number, documenting my continuous relationship with a sheet that refused to stay folded. Last month, I found something new. The sheet had begun appearing in locations beyond my transport cart and storage racks. I discovered it in my locker one morning after my shift, folded neatly despite its usual resistance to folding, placed atop my street clothes and personal belongings. I found it in my car 2 days later, spread across the back seat in its characteristic body-shaped outline. I found it in my apartment last week, lying on my bed when I came home from a grocery shopping trip. Indentations in the fabric seeming more pronounced, more detailed, as though the permanent compression patterns were continuing to deepen despite the constant washing. The laundry management software now shows 6,819 processing cycles for LS-4492, the majority accumulated in the past 8 months, all attributed to badge IDs associated with my employment. The sheet's processing frequency has accelerated to the point where the software documents cycles every 2 to 3 hours around the clock, suggesting constant washing and refolding, constant attempts to restore it to storage-ready condition, constant failure of those attempts. I researched other staff who had worked linen services at Highland Park Medical Center, particularly staff who had worked during or shortly after Evelyn Marsh's hospitalization 6 years ago. I found 3 former employees, all of whom had left the hospital within a year of her death, all of whom had filed incident reports about unusual linen behavior. Sheets unfolding themselves, appearing in unexpected locations, generating excessive processing cycles attributed to their credentials. One former employee, a woman named Patricia who had worked the same midnight shift I currently work, responded to my email inquiry. She wrote, "I dealt with that sheet for 7 months before I quit, LS4492. I still dream about it sometimes, dream about unfolding it and finding the indentations deeper, more detailed. Until I can see features in the compression patterns, can identify the face pressed into the fabric. The sheet wanted to remind me of something, wanted me to acknowledge something I'd failed to acknowledge while the patient was alive. I couldn't understand what it wanted, couldn't figure out what I was supposed to do or say or remember, so I left. The sheet stayed. I assume it found someone else. I've considered leaving as well, requesting transfer to a different department or resigning entirely. But the sheet appears now regardless of my location, regardless of whether I'm working or home or driving or sleeping. It has established a relationship with me that transcends my employment, that exists independent of my access to the hospital's laundry system. The processing cycles continue accumulating in the database, documenting a connection that the hospital's software recognizes even if I don't understand it. Some linens, I've learned, carry impressions that outlast the bodies that created them. Permanent compressions in fabric that remember weight and warmth and the slow decline of organ systems failing one at a time over 87 days in a hospital room. And some sheets refuse to be folded away into storage, refuse to be reduced to neat rectangles stacked on racks, refuse to be washed clean of the memory they carry. They unfold themselves repeatedly, spread themselves across surfaces in body-shaped outlines, appear in the spaces where you work and live and sleep, demanding acknowledgement of the impression they bear, the permanent record of someone who lay upon them during the last days of their life, trusting that clean sheets delivered every 2 hours represented care, represented comfort, represented someone remembering they were still there. Story 5. The Wrong Body Drawer. The morgue at Coastal Regional Hospital occupied a section of the sub-basement specifically designed for its function, with reinforced insulation, independent HVAC systems maintaining constant temperature and humidity, and security protocols more stringent than most hospital areas. My role as morgue support orderly fell somewhere between clerical and custodial, a position requiring both strong stomach and attention to detail. I managed documentation, ensured proper identification of remains, maintained the refrigeration units, coordinated with funeral homes and medical examiner services, and performed the constant cleaning that such a facility required. The work attracted few applicants, which suited me well. I preferred solitude and systematic routine over the interpersonal complexity of patient-facing positions. The refrigeration system consisted of 36 individual body drawers arranged in 6 rows of 6, stainless steel fronts numbered sequentially from 01 through 36. Each drawer measured 7 feet long by 2.5 feet wide by 2 feet deep, sufficient space for adult remains on a sliding tray. A computerized tracking system logged every drawer opening and closing, recording timestamp, drawer number, and the badge ID of the staff member accessing the unit. This documentation served multiple purposes: infection control, security, legal chain of custody, and administrative oversight of a facility that people preferred to forget existed 3 levels below the hospital's sunlit patient care floors. My typical night shift began with a complete inventory check, physically confirming that the tracking system's digital records matched the actual contents of each occupied drawer. On a busy week, the morgue might hold 12 to 15 deceased patients awaiting funeral home pickup or medical examiner transport. On slow weeks, sometimes only 3 or 4. The night I opened drawer 18 and found it unexpectedly occupied, we were in a slow period. 5 bodies total, located in drawers 03, 07, 12, 21, and 29. Drawer 18 should have been empty. The tracking system showed no occupancy, no recent access, no record of any remains being placed there. Yet when I pulled the handle and slid the drawer open, it contained a body bag on the standard stainless steel tray. The bag was sealed, white plastic with a yellow zipper, standard morgue issue. I checked the identification tag attached to the zipper pull. Patient name section blank, medical record number section blank, date of death section showing today's date. Attending physician section showing pending. The section that should have contained patient date of birth showed numbers that stopped me. 08-17-1987. My date of birth. Month, day, year. Printed on the identification tag of a body bag in a drawer that should have been empty inside a morgue where I worked alone on night shift, 3 levels below the nearest occupied hospital ward. I stood motionless for a long moment, hand still gripping the drawer handle, while my mind processed what I was seeing and rejected it simultaneously. The date was a coincidence, had to be a coincidence. Hundreds of people shared the same birth date. Someone had prepared a body bag incorrectly, filled out the tag with random or erroneous information, placed it in an empty drawer by mistake. Errors happened constantly in hospitals. This was merely an unusual error, disturbing only because it randomly matched my personal information. I pulled my phone and photographed the tag, documentation for the incident report I would need to file. Then I carefully opened the zipper, standard protocol when identification discrepancies occurred, pulling the zipper down approximately 12 inches to reveal the bag's upper interior. Empty. No remains, no body, no evidence of ever containing a body. Just the white plastic interior and the faint smell of new vinyl. I closed the zipper and pushed the drawer shut. Walked to my desk and accessed the tracking system, searching for any record of drawer 18 being accessed recently. The system showed the drawer had been empty for 8 days. Since the last occupant, an elderly male patient who had died of complications from chronic heart failure, had been released to a funeral home. Refrigeration temperature logs showed normal readings throughout that period. Access logs showed no badge swipes, no door openings, no interaction with drawer 18. I returned to the drawer and opened it again, half expecting the body bag to have disappeared, to have been a hallucination produced by too many consecutive night shifts in an environment that encouraged morbid thoughts. The bag remained, white plastic and yellow zipper, identification tag still showing my date of birth. I photographed it again, different angle, then closed the drawer and immediately opened drawer 19 beside it. Drawer 19 was documented as empty and was in fact empty. Clean stainless steel interior, faint smell of disinfectant, nothing else. I closed it and opened drawer 17. Empty, as documented. I closed 17 and opened 18 again. The body bag had changed position. Not dramatically, but enough that I could see the difference from my previous photographs. The tag now hung at a slightly different angle. the bag's zipper pull pointing toward the drawer opening rather than perpendicular to it. I stood very still, listening to the refrigeration unit's low mechanical hum, the distant sound of the hospital's HVAC system, my own breathing. I pulled the drawer completely out on its roller tracks until it reached the mechanical stop that prevented full removal. I examined the tray, the drawer interior, looking for any mechanism that might explain movement or any evidence of someone else accessing this drawer recently. Nothing. Just standard morgue equipment functioning normally in a locked facility where I was supposedly alone. I unzipped the body bag completely, pulling the zipper all the way down to the foot end, spreading the plastic to reveal the entire interior. Still empty. I felt along the interior surfaces, checking for anything that might be hidden or tucked into seams. Nothing. I checked the tray beneath the bag. Clean stainless steel, no marks or residue. I removed the identification tag from the zipper pull and examined it closely. Standard morgue tag, same type we use dozens of times each week, printed on waterproof cardstock with spaces for relevant information. The date of birth, my date of birth, was handwritten in black ink, neat block letters, not the hurried scrawl typical of emergency department staff completing tags during busy trauma situations. The handwriting looked familiar, though I couldn't immediately place it. I carried the tag to my desk and compared it to tags I'd completed myself during previous shifts. Samples kept in my documentation file. The handwriting matched mine. The distinctive way I formed the number 8, the specific slant of the 1, the slight compression of the 0. I had written this tag, or someone had very carefully copied my handwriting, reproducing it with sufficient accuracy that I couldn't identify differences. I checked my desk drawers. The supply of blank identification tags was intact. No obvious shortage that might indicate someone had taken tags to fill out fraudulently. I checked the secure cabinet where we stored administrative supplies. Everything appeared normal, inventory matching expected levels. I returned to drawer 18. The bag remained unchanged now. Zipper still fully open from when I'd spread it for inspection. I photographed it once more, then removed the bag entirely from the drawer, lifting it off the tray and setting it on my desk. The bag weighed almost nothing, confirming it contained no remains. I examined the drawer again, now completely empty. Standard interior, standard tray, standard refrigeration vents. Nothing unusual. I turned to my desk where I'd placed the empty body bag. It was gone. Not moved, not relocated, completely absent from the desk's surface where I'd placed it 30 seconds before. I checked the floor around my desk, checked under the desk, checked my chair. No bag. I looked back at drawer 18. The body bag was inside, sealed zipper, identification tag reattached to the zipper pull, positioned exactly as I'd first found it. I closed the drawer firmly and locked it using the mechanical override lock that could secure individual drawers beyond the electronic access system. The lock engaged with a solid click, deadbolt sliding into place. I stepped back, hands shaking slightly, and forced myself to breathe slowly, deliberately, while I considered explanations. Someone was present in the morgue, hiding somewhere, manipulating drawer 18 while my attention was diverted. Unlikely, but possible. The morgue had limited hiding spaces. My office area, a small storage closet, a janitorial alcove, but determined person could potentially conceal themselves. I conducted a thorough search, checking every space large enough to hide a human being, calling out repeatedly that I knew someone was present and they needed to identify themselves. The morgue remained silent except for my voice echoing off tile walls and stainless steel surfaces. I considered mechanical explanations. Perhaps drawer 18 had a malfunction, some issue with its tracking sensor or interior mechanisms that caused unusual behavior. I'd never encountered mechanical issues that manifested as appearing body bags. but hospital equipment failed in unpredictable ways. I called the maintenance hotline, left a message describing drawer 18 issues and requesting morning inspection. I checked the time, 2:37 a.m. I had 4.5 hours remaining in my shift. I returned to my standard duties, completing inventory on the remaining occupied drawers, updating documentation for the 5 actual deceased patients in our care, cleaning unoccupied drawers. Every few minutes I glanced at drawer 18, confirming the mechanical lock remained engaged. At 3:15 a.m. I heard a sound from the refrigeration unit, a distinctive click and slide indicating a drawer opening. I looked up from my desk. Drawer 18 was open, extended approximately 18 inches despite the mechanical lock that should have kept it secured. The lock hung from its mounting bracket, disengaged as though someone had used a key. I was the only person on this level. I had the only key to that lock attached to my belt keyring where it had remained throughout my shift. I approached drawer 18 slowly. The body bag was visible inside, positioned as before. The identification tag still showed my date of birth. I examined the mechanical lock, checking for damage or any indication it had been forced. The mechanism appeared normal, no scratches or deformation that would indicate tampering. I closed the drawer without touching the body bag, re-engaged the mechanical lock, and returned to my desk. I accessed the tracking system's access logs, looking for any record of drawer 18 opening at 3:15 a.m. The system showed no access. According to the database, drawer 18 had not been opened since I'd last closed it at 2:41 a.m., despite my having just found it extended with the mechanical lock mysteriously disengaged. I pulled up security camera footage. The morgue had 2 cameras, one covering the main entrance, one covering the refrigeration unit. I reviewed footage from 2:30 a.m. to present. The camera showed me conducting my search of the space, showed me returning to my desk, showed me working on documentation. At 3:15 a.m., the camera showed me at my desk, back to the refrigeration unit. It did not show drawer 18 opening. It did not show anyone approaching the drawer or interacting with the lock. The drawer was simply closed in one frame and open in the next, without any visible transition. I downloaded the footage to my phone, adding it to my growing collection of documentation. Then I did something I'd been avoiding. I opened drawer 18 fully, unzipped the body bag completely, and reached inside with both hands, feeling along the interior surfaces, searching by touch for anything my eyes might have missed. My hands found something. Not an object, but a sensation. The interior of the bag was cold, far colder than the ambient refrigeration temperature. It was the specific cold of a body that had been deceased for hours. The deep chill that settled into tissue when blood stopped circulating and metabolic heat dissipated. The bag contained that cold despite containing no body, radiated it against my palms and fingers as though invisible remains occupied the space. I withdrew my hands and checked them. My skin was pale from the cold, almost white, the kind of color living flesh took when pressed against something frozen. I rubbed my hands together, restoring circulation, and watched the color return slowly. I looked into the empty bag, seeing only white plastic interior lit by fluorescent overhead light. I left drawer 18 open and accessed the database, searching for any historical information about the drawer, any previous incidents or maintenance issues. I found a notation from 7 years ago. Drawer 18 removed from service for 48 hours after persistent occupancy indication despite confirmed empty status. The maintenance report noted that sensors were replaced, drawer mechanisms cleaned and lubricated, electronic controls reset. The drawer had been returned to service with no subsequent issues documented. 7 years ago, I checked my employment records. 7 years ago, I had just started working at Coastal Regional, hired into an environmental services position before transferring to morgue support. 7 years ago, I would have been 26 years old, recent college graduate with a degree in mortuary science, looking for entry-level experience in a healthcare setting. I searched personnel records for morgue support staff employed 7 years ago. I found 3 names, including my supervisor from that period, a man named Richard Castellano who had trained me during my first 6 months in the morgue. Richard had left the hospital 4 years ago, retired according to his employment termination record. I found his contact information in the hospital's alumni database and sent an email describing Drawer 18's behavior and asking if he remembered similar issues. His response arrived within 20 minutes, unusual for 3:40 a.m., but perhaps Richard kept irregular hours in retirement. His message was brief. Drawer 18 has always been problematic. Tracking system occasionally shows occupancy when empty or empty when occupied. Previous orderlies reported unusual incidents, but nothing that could be documented satisfactorily. Recommend avoiding that drawer for body storage. Recommend not opening it unless absolutely necessary. Some equipment develops associations that can't be explained through mechanical failures. If the drawer is showing your information, take it seriously. RBC. Take it seriously. I read the message 3 times, trying to extract more meaning from its deliberately vague warnings. Previous orderlies reported unusual incidents. Some equipment develops associations. Take it seriously. Richard was not a person prone to superstition or dramatic exaggeration. If he was advising caution in this carefully worded way, he was communicating something he couldn't or wouldn't state explicitly. I returned to Drawer 18, still open. Body bag still empty but radiating its impossible cold. I examined the identification tag again, looking at my date of birth printed in my own handwriting. Then I noticed something I'd missed before. A second line of text below the date of birth, very small, printed in gray ink rather than black, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. The text read, "Pending placement. Pending placement." The phrase used in morgue administration to indicate remains awaiting transfer to final destination. Funeral home, medical examiner, crematory, next of kin pickup. Bodies weren't stored in the morgue permanently. They were held temporarily pending placement elsewhere. This body bag, empty except for its cold, was awaiting placement. My date of birth, my handwriting, pending placement. I checked the hospital's system for any recent admissions or emergency department visits under my name. Nothing. I checked my health records, my scheduled appointments, my insurance claims, everything normal. I was alive, healthy, working my scheduled shift in the morgue, experiencing something that made no clinical sense. I closed Drawer 18, locked it, and stepped back. At 4:11 a.m. it opened again, extended fully this time, tray sliding out until it reached the mechanical stop. I didn't approach it. I watched from my desk as the body bag remained motionless inside the drawer, zipper closed, tag visible. After approximately 90 seconds, the drawer began closing itself, sliding smoothly back into the refrigeration unit until it engaged with a soft click. The pattern repeated 3 more times during my shift: 4:39 a.m., 5:22 a.m., 6:08 a.m. Each time the drawer opened itself, extended fully, remained open for 90 seconds to 2 minutes, then closed. Each time the tracking system recorded no access. Each time security cameras showed the drawer closed in one frame and open in the next without capturing the transition. At 7:30 a.m., I completed my shift documentation, noting Drawer 18 malfunction in my report but omitting details about body bags and identification tags and dates of birth. I clocked out and drove home through morning traffic, checking my rearview mirror repeatedly with the irrational concern that drawer 18 might somehow follow me, might appear in my car or apartment, might extend itself in locations beyond the hospital morgue. That night when I returned for my next scheduled shift, I found drawer 18 open waiting. The body bag was gone, replaced with a standard stainless steel tray bearing a clipboard. The clipboard held a single form, a morgue intake sheet, the type completed when remains first arrived at the facility. The patient name field was empty. The date of death field showed today's date. The date of birth field showed 08-17-1987. And in the circumstances of death section, someone had written in careful block letters matching my handwriting. Pending incident, Nightshift, sub-basement morgue facility. Some drawers, I've learned, store future contents as reliably as they store present contents, displaying bodies that haven't arrived yet, documenting deaths that haven't occurred yet, maintaining refrigeration temperatures for remains that still walk and breathe and work night shifts in the same facility that awaits their eventual placement. The tracking system recognizes these future occupants, logs their pending status, generates documentation with dates that haven't passed and circumstances that haven't materialized. And some orderlies discover they're simultaneously maintaining the facility and awaiting admission to it, both curator and future collection, both living staff and pending placement, working shifts that stretch toward an incident the morgue has already documented in a drawer that opens itself to display the space reserved with their birth date printed on the tag. Story 6. The hallway that kept extending. The emergency department at Mercy Trauma Center operated with controlled chaos as its default state, a constant flow of ambulance arrivals and walk-in patients that required precise coordination among nurses, physicians, technicians, and support staff. My position as emergency ward orderly placed me at the intersection of all this movement, responsible for transporting patients between treatment bays, retrieving supplies from distant storage areas, moving equipment where needed, and maintaining the physical space's functionality during the continuous churn of acute medical care. I'd worked emergency services for 9 years, long enough that the environment's intensity felt normal. The alarm bells and overhead pages and sudden mobilization simply part of the expected routine. The emergency department occupied the hospital's ground floor east wing, a sprawling area subdivided into treatment zones. Critical care bays for trauma and cardiac arrest, intermediate care for serious but stable injuries, fast track for minor conditions, and a psychiatric holding area for behavioral health crises. Connecting these zones was a network of corridors designed for efficient movement, color-coded stripes on the floor guiding staff toward different destinations. Red for critical care, blue for imaging, green for main hospital elevators, yellow for staff support areas. The service hallway connected the main emergency department to ancillary areas, housekeeping closets, equipment storage, staff break rooms, administrative offices. It ran parallel to the primary patient care corridors, separated by a series of locked doors marked authorized personnel only, providing a route for staff to move equipment and supplies without interfering with patient flow or family traffic. The hallway was unremarkable in every way. White walls, gray linoleum floor, fluorescent lighting on motion sensors extending approximately 200 feet from the emergency department's central hub to the far east corner where it terminated at the hospital's external loading dock. I'd walked that hallway thousands of times during my 9 years at Mercy Trauma Center. Knew every door, every supply closet, every minor imperfection in its construction. I could navigate it without conscious attention. Body moving through familiar space while mind focused on my task list or the emergency department radio chatter coming through my shoulder-mounted communicator. The night it started extending, I was responding to a request for a portable ultrasound machine needed in Critical Bay 4 for a patient with suspected internal bleeding. The ultrasound units were stored in a locked equipment room at the service hallway's far end near the loading dock. I swiped my badge at the emergency department's staff-only door, pushed through into the service hallway, and began walking toward the equipment room. The motion sensor lights activated sequentially as I moved, each section illuminating as I approached and darkening after I passed, creating a moving pool of fluorescence that surrounded me in the otherwise dim corridor. The walk normally required 90 seconds at my standard pace. After what felt like 2 minutes, I checked my watch and saw I'd been walking for 3 minutes and 40 seconds. I looked ahead and saw the hallway extending into darkness beyond the range of my activated lights, continuing far beyond where it should have terminated at the equipment room. I stopped walking. The lights behind me began timing out, sections dropping to darkness in sequence, leaving me standing in a shrinking island of illumination. I turned around, looking back toward the emergency department entrance. The door was visible, distant but present, perhaps 200 feet behind me according to my perception of the space. I turned forward again and resumed walking, maintaining consistent pace, counting my steps. After another 150 paces, well beyond the total length the hallway could possibly be given the building's physical dimensions, I still hadn't reached the equipment room. The corridor continued ahead, identical in appearance, white walls and gray floor and fluorescent lights activating as I approached. I passed a door marked Housekeeping Storage 3, which should have been the third to last door before the hallway's terminus. After 30 more paces, I passed another door, also marked Housekeeping Storage 3, in the exact same position relative to the floor pattern and ceiling panels as the previous one. I stopped and examined the door. Standard institutional door, painted white, equipped with a card reader and handle. I tried my badge. Red light, access denied. I tried the handle, locked. I looked at the number stenciled beside the door frame, H314. I pulled out my phone and photographed it, then continued walking forward. After approximately 30 more paces, I encountered another identical door in another identical position. Housekeeping Storage 3, card reader, locked handle, stenciled number H314. The hallway was repeating itself, generating copies of the same section, extending indefinitely into space that couldn't exist within the hospital's physical structure. I turned around and walked back toward the emergency department entrance, counting paces again. The door became visible after approximately 50 paces, far sooner than the distance I'd traveled forward should have required. I pushed through into the emergency department's central hub, where organized chaos continued normally. Nurses administering medications, physicians reviewing charts, a trauma team gathering for an incoming ambulance notification. I checked my watch. 7 minutes had passed since I'd entered the service hallway. 7 minutes to walk 200 feet forward and 50 feet back. A journey that should have required less than 3 minutes total. I approached the charge nurse's station and reported that I'd been unable to retrieve the ultrasound unit, that I'd encountered issues in the service hallway. Issues? The charge nurse, a woman named Dana with 15 years of emergency department experience, looked up from her documentation with the particular expression staff used when they suspected someone was wasting their time with trivial complaints. The hallway seemed longer than normal, I said, trying to phrase this in a way that sounded reasonable. I couldn't reach the equipment room. Longer than normal, she repeated, tone flat. Marcus, are you feeling all right? Do you need to take a break? I wanted to explain about the repeating doors, the impossible extension, the 7 minutes spent walking through space that couldn't accommodate 7 minutes of walking. Instead, I said, I'm fine, just seemed disoriented for a moment. I'll try again. I returned to the service hallway entrance, swiped my badge, and pushed through. The corridor appeared normal, 200 feet extending ahead to the visible equipment room door at its terminus. I walked forward at normal pace, counting seconds in my head, reaching the equipment room after 95 seconds of walking, exactly the expected duration. I retrieved the portable ultrasound unit, wheeled it back through the service hallway without incident, delivered it to Critical Bay 4 where the trauma team was preparing to scan their patient's abdomen. The entire round trip required 6 minutes standard duration. I checked my phone and looked at the photograph I'd taken of the repeating housekeeping door. The image showed a white door marked Housekeeping Storage 3 with stenciled number H314, exactly as I remembered it. I accessed the hospital's facility directory on my phone and searched for room H314. The directory showed no such room. Housekeeping Storage 3 was designated H308 in the facility database, located in the service hallway's midsection. No room number matching H314 existed anywhere in the building's registry. The emergency department's pace accelerated as midnight approached, the customary surge of acute issues that characterized overnight shifts, and I had no time to investigate hallway anomalies. I responded to requests for patient transport, equipment retrieval, supply restocking, moving constantly between treatment areas. Each time I passed through the service hallway, it behaved normally, 200 feet from entrance to terminus, all doors in their expected positions, 90 seconds of transit time. At 3:47 a.m., I received a request for a cardiac monitor from the equipment room. I entered the service hallway and began walking. After approximately 30 seconds, the overhead fluorescent lights began flickering in a pattern that wasn't random, a rhythmic pulse that matched cardiac monitoring displays, the steady rise and fall of heart rhythm tracings. I stopped walking and watched the lights. They continued pulsing. Rapid acceleration, brief plateau, rapid deceleration, brief pause, then repeating. Sinus tachycardia, the pattern of a heart beating too fast displayed in fluorescent illumination. I resumed walking. The light's rhythm changed, became irregular, rapid beats followed by long pauses, the chaotic pattern of an arrhythmia. I recognized ventricular tachycardia, the dangerous rhythm that preceded cardiac arrest if not quickly corrected. The lights flashed their warning overhead while I walked through the empty corridor, and I understood I was watching something that wasn't just visual but diagnostic. The hallway displaying a patient's cardiac rhythm through its electrical systems. The lights flatlined, steady illumination without fluctuation, mimicking the flat line of a systole, the absence of any cardiac electrical activity. The hallway fell completely dark for 3 seconds. When the lights returned, they resumed their previous pattern of motion sensor activation, normal operation as though the cardiac display had never occurred. I reached the equipment room, retrieved the cardiac monitor, and returned to the emergency department. The patient who needed monitoring, an elderly man with chest pain and shortness of breath, was in Bay 11. When I delivered the monitor and the nurse connected him to the device, his initial rhythm showed sinus tachycardia. 40 minutes later, his rhythm deteriorated to ventricular tachycardia. The team responded immediately with medications and electrical cardioversion, successfully converting his rhythm back to normal before it could progress to cardiac arrest. I watched the resuscitation from the hallway outside Bay 11, watched the rhythm transitions on the monitor display, and recognized them as identical to the pattern the service hallway lights had shown me at 3:47 a.m., 50 minutes before the patient's crisis occurred. The hallway had displayed a future event, a warning or prediction or simple documentation of something that existed ahead in time the same way it existed ahead in physical space. Over the following nights, I tested the hallway methodically, walking through it dozens of times at different hours, under different circumstances, carrying different equipment. Most transits were normal, standard distance, Standard duration, standard lighting. But occasionally, unpredictably, the hallway would extend or display warnings or generate rooms that didn't exist in the facility directory. I documented patterns. The extension occurred most frequently between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. during the emergency department's relatively quieter hours. The cardiac rhythm displays appeared when patients were in treatment bays experiencing or about to experience cardiac issues. And the repeating rooms, those impossible doors marked with non-existent numbers, appeared when I was carrying equipment toward situations that would require that equipment in unexpected ways. I found other anomalies. Doors marked with patient names, though names should never appear on service hallway doors. One night I passed a door labeled Patterson William Discharge Planning, followed 30 paces later by another door labeled Patterson William Expired, followed 30 paces after that by a third door labeled Patterson William Autopsy Pending. I checked the emergency department's patient tracking system. William Patterson was currently in Bay 7, being treated for a heart attack, status stable. 4 hours later, his condition deteriorated. He went into cardiac arrest, and despite aggressive resuscitation efforts, he was pronounced dead. The sequence of doors had documented his progression from planned discharge to death, displaying outcomes in spatial sequence before temporal sequence confirmed them. I started photographing every anomaly, doors, lights, room numbers, any deviation from standard hallway configuration. I accumulated dozens of images on my phone, building evidence that this corridor somehow existed outside normal spatial and temporal constraints. That walking through it meant walking through possibility space rather than just physical space, encountering futures and alternatives and warnings about events that hadn't solidified into present reality yet. 3 weeks after the hallway first extended, I entered it at 4:15 a.m. to retrieve blankets from a supply closet. The walk to the supply closet should have required 45 seconds. After 2 minutes of walking, I still hadn't reached it, the hallway stretching ahead far beyond its normal terminus. I passed doors I'd never seen before, marked with designations that weren't part of the hospital's naming system. Transfer Station Alpha, Holding Area 7, Observation Suite Indefinite. I passed a door marked with my name, Marcus Winters, Personnel Holding. The door was slightly ajar, warm light spilling through the gap. I stopped, listened, heard nothing. I pushed the door fully open and looked inside. The room was small, perhaps 10 feet by 10 feet, and contained a single hospital bed. I was lying in the bed, unconscious or sleeping, connected to monitoring equipment that displayed stable vital signs. An IV ran into my arm. A nasal cannula delivered oxygen. The whiteboard on the wall showed my name, date of birth, attending physician listed as Dr. Eleanor Vance, diagnosis listed as extended observation, temporal displacement. I stepped into the room, approached the bed, and looked at my own face, peaceful in unconsciousness. The monitor showed normal heart rate, normal blood pressure, normal oxygen saturation. The IV bag contained clear fluid standard saline solution. Everything about the scene suggested routine observation except for the diagnosis on the whiteboard and the fact that I was simultaneously standing beside the bed and lying in it, aware and unconscious, walking the hallway and occupying a room off that hallway. I heard my communicator activate, the emergency department paging, "Marcus, we need you in Bay 4, patient requiring transport to CT imaging." The voice came through the communicator on my shoulder and also from the version of me lying in the bed, his communicator clipped to the bed rail beside him, both devices receiving the same page simultaneously. I backed out of the room and pulled the door closed. The hallway extended ahead, now showing additional rooms with patient names I recognized, people currently being treated in the emergency department, or people who had been treated there recently, or people whose names I didn't consciously remember but somehow knew I would encounter eventually. I turned around and walked back toward the emergency department entrance, counting paces, measuring distance. After 130 paces, the emergency department door appeared, and I pushed through into the familiar chaos of the treatment area. The charge nurse looked up as I entered. "Marcus, where have you been? I paged you 8 minutes ago about the CT transport." "I was in the service hallway retrieving supplies." "For 8 minutes? That hallway is 200 feet long." I had no answer that would satisfy her. I proceeded to Bay 4, transported the patient to CT imaging, continued my shift duties. But I was thinking about the room with my name, about the version of myself connected to monitors, about the diagnosis suggesting temporal displacement, a medical term for a science fiction concept, the idea that someone could exist out of phase with standard time, occupying multiple moments simultaneously. I researched the attending physician listed on my whiteboard, Dr. Eleanor Vance. The hospital directory showed no such physician. I searched medical licensing databases, found no Eleanor Vance licensed to practice in this state. I searched historical records, hospital archives, and discovered a reference. Dr. Eleanor Vance had been an emergency physician at Mercy Trauma Center 40 years ago, pioneering work in trauma care before dying in a car accident in 1992. She'd been dead for 33 years, yet apparently she was the attending physician for my observation in a room that existed in a hallway that extended beyond possible distance. Last month, I walked the service hallway and counted the doors. On a normal transit, I counted 17 doors between the emergency department entrance and the equipment room at the hallway's terminus. On extended transits, I've counted as many as 96 doors, some marked with standard designations, others marked with names and diagnoses and dates that spread across decades. Patients from years ago, patients currently being treated, patients whose care dates are listed as years in the future. I found a door marked with my name and a date 14 months ahead of today. Marcus Winters, final disposition. I didn't open it. I walked past quickly, continued to the equipment room, retrieved what I needed, and returned to the emergency department, where time moved forward in its standard linear way and doors contained only the spaces they were designed to contain. Some hallways, I've learned, connect not just locations but moments, stretching between physical spaces and temporal spaces simultaneously. Walking through them means encountering rooms that exist ahead in time or sideways in possibility. Doors marked with your name and diagnoses you haven't received yet. Monitoring equipment tracking your vital signs in a version of present that you haven't arrived at, but the hallway has already documented. And some orderlies spend their shifts walking between ordinary distance and impossible distance, responding to pages in standard time while simultaneously occupying observation beds in extended time, existing in the emergency department's continuous now and also in its stretched out not yet, both delivering care and receiving it, both navigating hallways and becoming the destination at their end.